Hi guys, thanks so much for joining us for the Mastering the Automation and AI Project Journey Planning for Success webinar today with EdgeTech, and we've got three great guests with us today. We've got Jim Walker, who is the Public Sector Advisory Board member at Roboyo and was Public Sector CTO at UiPath previous to that. We have Alex, who's founder of SilkFlow.com, and Will Harris, who was former Chief Digital Officer at IQEQ. We'll go around the circle. Everyone can tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing, what qualifies you to speak on this matter, because I'm sure you will have a lot better understanding of what you do and a lot more better understanding about this than I do. So Jim, kick it off.
Yeah, so one, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to learning a little bit from our fellow panelists today. So I'm Jim Walker. I'm out of Florida, specifically the Pensacola area here in the U.S. My background is U.S. public sector as an employee for about 32 years. All of that was in technology. All of that was with the Department of Defense, NASA, Missile Defense Agency, and really helping to bring, at the time, IT infrastructure. At the very end of my career, I started looking at RPA. I was with the Shared Services Center at NASA, and we were looking for ways to keep our costs down. And we fielded the first robot in the federal government. We named it George Washington, and the whole experiment of RPA started in the federal government. Now, the General Services Administration used our model to get started. The Department of Defense Comptroller used our model to get started, and now there are probably 140 agencies that are using RPA in the federal space. And today I'm with Roboyo and their public sector. Roboyo's 800-person team based out of the UK. Of course, we have a US team here, and we are just, quite frankly, and I think that's will be part of our lessons learned, is we're trying to help technologists learn how to be automationists.
Thanks for that. Thanks. Yeah, really loads of lessons that we can learn, especially with all of that federal background experience. And I think a lot of the time people get hung up on RPA experience and what's an RPA, when realistically an RPA implementation, as I'm sure we'll get into, is much less the RPA and technology and much more the other sides and the planning for it. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm from London. Started off in banking and finance, and then did a few hackathons, got bored of the whole kind of financial aspect. I was in like operations. A lot of that work could have been automated, so I started building my own automations with Python and stuff. Then around 2016, 2017, I got into intelligent automation via Deloitte, mainly as like on the consulting side. So at that time, RPA was my first introduction to automation. It was getting quite big, really trending. A lot of companies, large institutions, were trying to get into it. So had loads of fantastic projects, really kind of cut my teeth on those. Then I started my own consultancy for about 7 years. That was pretty successful. And then about 2 years ago, I started building my own tool called SilkFlow to try and address some of the issues that I saw regarding like adoption, getting started, scaling, and also monitoring the whole process.
No, thanks for that. Really excited to hear some of the things that you've got to say. And Will, we've known each other for quite a while.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie.
Probably more to your disappointment than mine, but yeah, tell everyone else.
Thanks very much for having me. So yeah, for those that don't know me, I'm Will Harris. Quick, fleeting background. I actually qualified as a lawyer and spent most of my career in management consulting, then getting into advanced tech, and specifically how advanced tech changes the structures of organizations. I'm reading my doctorate in applied artificial intelligence, a doctor of business administration, again, researching how the application of advanced technology really affects the structures of organizations and how we have to build them for success in the future. I consider myself a non-technical resource, and as by my title, people have guessed, my most recent role is I was the Group Chief Digital Officer of a fund administration company called IQEQ. It's about 5,500 staff, about 800 billion US of assets under administration in that specialist alternate asset fund administration space. So happy to be here. I think I'm going to learn a lot from the other two gentlemen on this call as well.
No, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Clearly, you can see there's loads of expertise here, and then there's just me asking people and talking around it as well. So hopefully I can help out. My name's Ollie Sully. I run EdgeTech. We're a leading RPA and intelligent automation AI recruitment business based here in the UK. However, we service UK, Europe, and the US. But let's get into it. So I guess first off, what practical steps do you use to identify the right opportunities for automation and AI implementation in an organization? What let's take it back to strip it down. What are the very first steps for you, Jim?
Yeah, so you've got to appreciate that right off the bat that you're not building an application when you're using all of this digital labor. You're using, whether you use an RPA or chatbots or document processing, whatever you're using, that digital labor is going to mimic human behavior. So you need to identify, and it's really easy today because everybody's got the list of 5, 10, 15 criteria. Is it highly repetitive? Is the data structured or not? Do the rules change often? How many people are involved? What's their salary? But there's an easy math solution to say this could be done, this should be done. And way too often, my experience, especially with government, is we're so afraid of making a mistake, right? Because in government, when you make a mistake, it's a news article. It's not just oh, Bob, you failed fast, congratulations, we're going to go at it again. It is Bob failed and we lost some money and the end of the world as we know is going to happen. So bringing a team in and saying, here are the 15 criteria we're going to use, or the 10, and racking and stacking prevents somebody from coming up after you've built. We built one for an agency where after it got built, once a quarter, it updated their Oracle system. And the client said, well, that's not really impressive. And we said, you are 100% correct. It wasn't impressive to us when you asked us to build it. And when we mentioned it in a meeting, here are the notes. You understood it, but you knew that if it broke, nobody would know, right? So I think the most practical step is come up with your list of criteria. There's plenty out there now. You don't have to be, guessing what they are. Check against all of those and to determine what you predict your ROI is going to be, right? And in government, I would say there's no ROI, but there's ROE, return on the effort, right? The goal may not be to save $1 million. The goal may be to process 1 million passports faster than they've ever been done, to deliver government services to citizens better than they've been before. So identify what you believe your return on effort is going to be, build it, and then keep measuring to see did you indeed reach those ROEs.
No, great. Yeah, no, I clearly I'm going to agree. But yeah, Alex, unless what have you got to say? I'm hoping it's probably not going to be completely wrong.
It was fantastic. So it was an interesting,
yeah,
it was an interesting play on the government side of how they think about stuff. So most of the businesses I deal with are either enterprise, small, medium, right? So they've all got their own, and that's the key thing for everyone to take away. Everyone's got their own definition of value. Going back to Jim's point. So the first thing is just to understand what is it you're looking for. Are you looking for productivity? Are you looking for employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, quality, reducing of errors, and all that kind of stuff? Get your goals in place. Don't pick too many when you're starting out. Focus on the ones that you want to prioritize, and then as you scale, then you can start to add more and more priorities. But first off, I guess, process analysis. You've got to understand your business. You've got to understand what your teams and what your employees are doing. You've got to find, obviously, those high-value, rule-based, repetitive tasks. Everyone's step into intelligent automation, for example, is mostly RPA. Well, now you've got like Power Automate, UiPath, the low-code ones like the Python-based ones like Robocorp and so on. Right? There's so many different tools out there. But everyone starts off with like task-based automation. Once you've got your list of processes and your pipeline, then you can start looking at, okay, what's the business value that each of these are going to give us, right? So again, is it accuracy, faster processing time, freed up hours, rank those based on, again, those priorities you mentioned earlier. Are they feasible technically? So the third part, right? So once you've identified them, can you actually build them? Are they too complex? Are they low complexity ones? Or just, do you lack the kind of data that you need to automate? And again, automation or any AI requires good quality data. Work out your ROI, like Jim mentioned. So what's your return on investment or return on effort, for example, depending on what you're looking at. So whether that's costs, direct ones, or indirect, like training or process changes. Stakeholder engagement is another really important step. Making sure that everyone is involved and has insight from the very beginning all the way to the end, and keeping that going as well, so that you keep that buy-in. I guess that's very important. That's where I see a lot of projects failing. It's when after the first few POCs, the kind of excitement around automation and AI starts to die out. And I guess finally just get started, really. Do some pilot projects.
No. Yeah, I see what you mean there. I think it's one of those situations, isn't it, where there's plenty of reasons that things go wrong, which we'll dig into later. But if you're worrying about why it's going to go wrong, you're never going to start. Will, what I know there's been a lot covered. What are your top tips on this point?
So I'll answer to not echo colleagues on the call. Great insight, great advice. I particularly like, just get started. Success favors action, not analysis, right? But to expand on that a little more, to when we get out of the lower end of complexity and automation, intelligent automation, and get into AI. And I'll speak from, this is really convenient actually, given we've got Jim talking from really a public sector government point of view. Alex, to your point then, it's small, medium enterprise. Most of my experience has been in large corporate. So, a different point of view. If I focus most of my answers on large corporate and enterprise clients, the first thing to understand is what's in your tool chest. And if I use an analogy, it's not hard to dig a borehole if you're a bore drilling company and you have a bore drill. It's pretty hard to dig a borehole if you're a lumberjack and you have a chainsaw. And that's inversely the same as well. So before we go down the route of what are we doing with AI, do you have the capability, or do you have a partner that can execute on AI? And then what do you mean by AI? Because as most people on the call know, there's still no in the audience know there's still no common definition for artificial intelligence, despite the term being used since the 1950s. So understand your capability. This is where I get a little bit more academic, but it's really, it does have a real viable application. The other thing is, don't forget about Morvax paradox. And if anybody hasn't come across Morvax paradox, a very simplified version of it is AI is really good at stuff that you think it's going to be bad at, that's really hard. And it's really bad at stuff that you think it's going to be really good at. So to use an example, to build an AI-driven robot to make a cup of tea would be infinitely more complex than to build an AI-driven robot to beat you and everyone else in the world at chess. Yet teaching a child how to make a cup of tea will take a few minutes, and teaching them how to master chess will take several decades. That's the summary of Morvax's principle. So if you're really looking at deep-driven AI, it's highly likely that it's going to solve a lot of the problems that you think are insoluble. So there's a couple components to it. First of all, understand the capability in your team. Don't be giving deep learning, very complex capabilities to an amateur team who haven't done it before, or without getting a partner. And also, as executives or as business leaders, don't make the assumption that what you're looking at is going to be too difficult for your technology team, because quite often it's actually the inverse of that. So that would be where I would start, is to understand what I have, go and have a look at the problems I need to solve, and start playing pair matching.
No, I get that. And I appreciate the analogy for the AI. I think, as you say, people always expect certain things to be a lot easier than they are, and other things to be a lot harder. And until you do it, you just never know. And on a similar point to that, I see it a lot. I speak to people in the business and this sort of stuff, especially when it's consulting companies on site. They'll pick the biggest project with the biggest ROI as their proof of concept. And if it nails it, great, brilliant, we've made loads of money. But then no following project ever matches that first one. Is that a mistake on their part? Is that obviously doing it so they sell the business, but is that a mistake, getting them thinking that there could be loads of things like this, and really their first one's the best one? Do you think it's better maybe to start smaller and then start building up to those sorts of things when they're a bit more comfortable? What are your thoughts, Will?
a bit horses for courses. I think if I had to pick one or the other, I would say if I went out tomorrow and tried to become a builder, the first thing I would build would not be the Taj Mahal. So it would be sensible that we start with something on the more simple end. But similarly, these tools are so intuitive, certainly when we look on the RPA, intelligent automation end of the spectrum, and into certain areas of AI, or the rage at the moment, of course, being generative AI, are so simple to use that you're proving nothing to yourself by picking something too easy. I think there needs to be a sensible balance. It should show some demonstrable business value. I'd avoid the first 2 or 3 projects being specifically about direct return on investment. How's it impacting EBITDA? How's it impacting bottom line? I would treat it much more as an R&D investment or an innovation investment in order to understand the capability of the tools and then identify how they could purvey across one's organization. And that will require a relative level of complexity. But yeah, don't go out trying to solve world hunger on day one. But similarly, let's build something a little bit more complex than a Lego house.
Yeah, I get that. And Jim, when you built your first bot at NASA, was it something that was shooting for the moon, or was it something that was a little bit more?
No, so our story certainly matches what Will just said. Another agency in DC that's a really large agency compared to NASA was trying to build this one solution that was going to require about 14 different bots to run it and go and step and talking to each other and passing information. We were building one that just took an email in, open it up, grab the name, check the database. If it existed, create a ticket. If it didn't exist, put it into the database and then create a ticket. Relatively simple. But we planted the flag, right? We said, we're done. It's running. It runs on its own. Every time an email comes in, the bot checks its own queue, does its thing, processes it, and creates a ticket for us. The other agency got in there and said, wait a minute, you mean we have to have credentials for these bots? How can we give non-human credentials? And what do you mean I got to get access from that other agency for this bot to be able to log in? Well, don't tell them it's a bot. It's just emulating your people, you know. Well, yes, but it could create denial of service because it could go too fast. Well, great. Put a little time delay in there. Tell it to only do 3 per minute instead of 30. And so I think you have to have this period where you're just learning what these automation things are, right? You're figuring out how does it work on our network. And so make ones that are simple to learn the things that you don't learn when the consultants like us and Roboyo are in there talking to you. You're just looking at the big picture. But to get started, you got a whole lot of little pictures to do. And then you can get moving. And it's a math thing. You know how long a small project takes a couple weeks. You can do 52 weeks in a year. You can say, well, I could do 25. Well, people are going to take a vacation, so you really can't do 25, but you know how many you can build in a year. Yes, Jim, but we want to build medium complexity so we get more functional value out of them. Great. How much does it take you? 4 weeks. Well, there's 12 months, but I can't do 12 because I've got people on leave, so I can build 11. What are the 11 that you want to build? So part of the conversation that you've got to help people understand is anybody could run a project to build one. But to build a program, you have to have a training period for your staff. You have to have a policy group to understand the credentials and the security and things like that. And you can do both of those together, go get started, and also build that airplane while it's on the ground while you're learning how to fly.
No, thanks for that. I think it's nice getting, as you say, just from such different perspectives, because as you say, if you're a private sector business and you want something done and you want it for ROI, something like that, you just get it done. But if you're a big public sector organization that's got to interact with 4 different other public sector organizations, the questions aren't about that. It's how do we get authorization for this, and maybe these people don't want it, but we still need it done. So how are we going to work that out? Alex, when you're on site, when you're working with people, how do you advise they start? What projects do you advise they look at?
So when I was doing consulting, and based on your question, right, which ones do you go for? I guess it all comes back to that initial analysis or that discovery. You've got your complexity matrix, you know, what's low, what's difficult. You've got your, automation potential, how much can be automated of that particular bot based on data quality and all that kind of stuff, the types of applications used, all those initial discovery questions. But then also the expected ROI from that as well. And then also it comes down to the priorities that you had previously, so quality, productivity, and so on, right? It's an internal kind of horses for courses situation where you've got to choose whatever suits your business. If you're a consultancy, probably best off starting with the easy to medium complexity automations, because they're the kind of quick wins we used to call in the industry. But then also making sure that it provides enough value and enough excitement. I think that's the key thing, right? If the employees are excited about it and the internal champions are excited about it, then it's hopefully going to snowball into more work or more opportunities. Once you've done that initial POC or that initial project, which is easy or medium complexity, maybe takes you 4 weeks, maybe takes you 8 weeks, then eventually, the development team will have a better understanding of the environment. You'll have the time needed to actually set all of the IT standards or securities or best practices you need to then start to tackle the really tough complexity projects, which may even unlock further ROI going down the road. But then coming back to it, it's all about that pipeline. Did you do enough work in the discovery phase to facilitate this?
Sure. No, thanks for that. And as you say, sort of, if you nailed the start, then everything else should go smoothly. And I think that's a lot of the time the problem that you see when businesses have.
It needs to be continuous. Like if you just have 5 options, it's not much choice, right? But if you do that project and then you say, oh, hang on, we've got another 5 that are similar, then it leads into those further discussions, leads into that those opportunities and hopefully more scale.
Sure. No, I get that, and I completely agree. And in regards to engaging people within it, obviously RPA can be something that touches every part of the business, and with that it means that you're going to have buy-in from a lot of different areas in the business that maybe haven't heard of it, don't know, or are a bit scared of it. What do you find are the best ways to put business cases forward to make sure that you've got buy-in from whether it's the most senior level or just the majority of people that you're going to be working alongside, Alex?
So it's kind of like 2 different things, I guess, right? So you're talking about stakeholder management, or are you talking about the initial business case?
Let's go stakeholder management first off. Let's go with making sure that everyone's on board in terms of you can get everyone on side for working throughout the process, and no one's going to be a blocker. I guess that's the problem, isn't it? When you're working with so many different departments, if your process navigates through 3 different divisions, you need everyone on the side throughout the whole thing to make sure no one ruins it.
And I guess that's a key part, right? It kind of brings in change management as well, right? So you've got to really start early. So in those initial POCs, from those initial discovery sections or pieces of work, you've got to really involve pretty much every stakeholder, from the person who's doing the work all the way to upper management. And that helps with getting valuable insights into what's most important for them, fostering that ownership as well, not just in terms of the project owners or the managers, but also the people that are doing the work. They own this kind of automation. There's obviously some work needing to be done to communicate the value, like what's in it for them. We started off, I guess, in the industry talking about FTE. That's become more of like a taboo phrase now, because people get scared when they first hear that. It's like, oh, you're trying to get rid of an employee or make this much of an employee. But if you look at it on the flip side, it's more about, okay, well, how many hours can we unlock from your time? If you weren't doing this for 2 hours a day, how would that feel? Would you prefer to do this part of your job at length compared to this admin piece? So getting that engagement, and this could be through workshops, could be through initial training. Workshops are definitely key. Teaching people, giving them that kind of ownership to go away, come back with new ideas. Clear communication, pretty much all the way through that whole process, that whole life cycle. Regular updates and making sure you have some kind of stakeholder matrix as well. This is like an old business analyst tactic. So I started out as a business analyst, worked my way up to like RPA lead and then sector lead and geographical lead. And that's before I did the consulting aspect. So that there's a whole load of stakeholders you need to take into account, and just understanding, especially in different departments, what their goals are for that year, whether it's financial, whether it's cost efficiency, but also who reports to them, what their goals are, what their needs are. And if you do a good enough job in discovery, that's why I say business analyst key. If you have a good one, it's brilliant. Then you should hopefully be able to get champions to your cause, and that helps keep that whole life cycle, that whole continuous automation aspect going.
Right, no, that's really helpful and really thorough. I was worried that we were going to have to see your door get knocked down there, Alex. There's police in the back or something like that.
Sorry, mate. Yeah.
Absolutely fine. Will, how do you find it? Do you find it different for large corporates? Is it more complicated because they're big companies, or is it more this is what you're doing, so it's being done now?
Well, a bit of both. I think that's really down to corporate culture, right? You go to somewhere like Spotify, they're not likely to say this is the way it's going to be done outside of the most specific corporate decisions around the direction of travel. You go to somewhere like a big bank and you're just going to be told what's going on. The thing for me is a lot of these problems have been solved before. One of the interesting observations in my 15 odd years of operating in this space now is every new technology, so it's not just RPA or IA or ChatGPT or whatever else, data, big data, dark data, everything that came before. But for whatever reason, every time we have a new thing, when it comes to delivery, we try and reinvent the wheel. And delivery has been the same, well, I can't exaggerate and say thousands of years, but certainly since the 80s and 90s, an advent of management as a profession, and then the consulting aspect that comes with that, and strategies in delivering change. So Kotter's theory of change management hasn't really changed in 20 years. Have a powerful message, build a powerful guiding coalition, enable change champions, create the change, capitalize on it, et cetera, et cetera. When I was consulting, every single client that I had, not one had a change manager aligned to their RPA program, as in your job is to control change and communications and stakeholder engagement. You get to the end and every single one that we went in to recover would say, it's just not landing, it's not sticking, we're not getting buy-in. And you're a pariah if you said to them, well, it's because you didn't invest in change management. They go, well, it has to be more complex than this because the technology's new and fancy. And in my experience, it really isn't. If you set up the program correctly, you understand the corporate culture, you have a clear, strong message, mission, purpose, you build that powerful guiding coalition of getting board level buy-in. And then rather than driving the change into the business, you release the change into the business, creating change champions, and then capitalizing on wins and sharing good news stories, that you do start getting somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, not everything's nirvana. Sometimes you're going to go into an organization and it's just going to suck. It's going to feel like a slog. And then it's much more about just delivering on it and demonstrating with data, see it did what we said it would do. But the majority of the time, I believe this just comes back down to good old professional change management and making sure you have your comms plan, making sure you're engaging with stakeholders at all levels, and that you have that very senior buy-in. And don't hide what you're doing. If you are there to remove 300 jobs, they're going to work it out, right?
Yeah.
They're going to work it out. Don't try and hide it is the big thing.
No, and I it's nice, as you said, as you mentioned before, to have so many completely different perspectives on it. And I have a feeling that the public federal sector one here is probably going to be a bit different and a bit trickier to manage. How's that been?
Yeah, well, remember, you're going in, and the first thing people are going to say is, we can't do it that way. There's a rule or policy or something like that, or we've never done it that way. Of course you haven't. You never had this technology. You're going to be fighting with, well, they really could use this, but our stuff, it can't be automated. Really, when we're automating contracts now, where the bulk of the contract language is pulled from a variety of sources, and it says, here, you're ready to sign. And you're starting with Redline. You're not starting from scratch. Where hospitals are using it in-process patients and remind them of their appointments and to remind them of their medicines. And you're going to sit there and say, well, the stuff I do is too complicated. It can't be automated. And then the whole job replacement. Of course, automation is going to replace jobs, right? When we have a tractor versus a horse pulling a plow, everybody wants to be in the tractor with the air conditioning, the CD playing, listening to their music being directed by GPS. And it displaced people. But there's somebody now that keeps the tractor repaired and provides the capability for them to hear music. And it provides them solutions to their air conditioning, their GPS. There's hundreds of jobs that nobody thought were going to be created. I mean, to think about a car and all of the jobs related to replacing tires, replacing painting, upgrading it, fixing it when it's broken, fixing it when it had a wreck, teaching people to drive with driver training classes, fuel stations to fuel it up. All those things came about. No guy out in the middle of the U.S. West in Oklahoma in 1900 that saw the first car said, that's never going to make it, right? He couldn't see all of the other things. It just couldn't be seen at the time. And then you're going to have around you all of these people that want to be in government. I want to call them bureaucratic entrepreneurs. They want to use the new stuff. They want to do this. And there's this tide against them. Well, we tried that before. No, you didn't. You tried something like that before. Let's try it again with this new stuff. Right? Musk famously told NASA, hey, you could reuse your rockets and cut your costs down. Don't be silly, young boy, go away. And now, of course, everybody wants to reuse the rockets. Why do you want to buy a brand new one every time? So I think, when you're talking with your stakeholders, to me, the one key that you need to do is you need to let the people who are benefiting from this talk about it. I'd like to present to you a video on X, Y, and Z. Here's the video. Now, Bob, who's down in our marketing department, or Mary, who's over in our finance, is going to explain to you what it does. Because when Mary's not afraid of it, none of the other Marys are afraid of it. When I'm telling you we need to do it, he's going to screw us somehow. They're going to cut our salaries. They're going to cut our jobs. Because when Mary says, oh my God, I got to my kid's ball game. I heard my son's first recital. I went and watched my daughter play soccer. Not World Cup against the U.S. because we're struggling, but other soccer that she could be seeing. And Mary saying, I finally only have to work 8 hours, but they're the best 8 hours I've ever given this company, or the best service I've ever given those citizens. Suddenly other people start to say, I need to know a little bit more about that. And then your change management kicks in. You've got lunch and learns, you've got newsletters, you're posting the results of your automations and how they're saving money, how they're making us serve better, how customers are writing in saying, I love your service. But you need to let the people who are benefiting from your initial automations do the talking for you. Don't let leadership talk, because then it looks like a corporate pushdown.
And no, and I think that's a great point. I think if humanizing it makes all the difference, doesn't it? Being able to really show the impact, not necessarily on the business, not saying, oh, well, it saved the business $3 million, it saved the business 100 hours, but as you say, it saved me half an hour, which meant I could go home, and this sort of thing, taking it down to that level where it's like, oh, well, if you can save me an hour, then that's great. Also, if it's saving you an hour, you're like, I'm not going to lose my job. I'm not losing my job for the 1 hour a week, but it's making my life a little bit easier. And this sort of stuff. It just
I don't
really
want to
changes
monopolize it, but let me toss in one other concept for you.
Yeah.
There's work that every employee is supposed to be doing today. And I would argue that most of them can't do all the work that they have assigned to them today. So if you automate 10 or 15% of that employee's work, they can get to the 10 or 15% that they can't get to. Then there's always a corporate meeting or group team meetings at the end of the year where we say, if we only had some more money and some more resources, we could do this. So if I automate 50% of your work so that you can finally get to that other stuff that we could do and should do, there's so much work that you can be done that it's not like we're going to run out anytime soon. so the idea of these massive layoffs, I'm sure that it's going to occur in some places, and further down the road it will. And I've got to have faith that we're going to create new jobs as a result of the things that we're doing now. But if you think about your workplace today and for the next 10 years, if you automate 50% of everything that's in your company right now or in your government agency, what are the things that you wish you could do that you could now finally do? Because you have loyal, already employed employees. You don't have to retrain. You don't have to hire. You don't have to have all that cost. You can just say to them, does anybody want to reskill and do this new thing? Anybody tired of doing the paper pushing that they've been doing for the last 10 years? Because we've got a whole department we're going to stand up, and we're looking for people that want to do it.
I think if I can, if you don't mind me adding a little bit there, Ollie, I think that's so salient. So we're facing globally, most regions, there'll be some regions that this isn't true, we're on the precipice of a really dangerous recession. We're seeing lots of challenges occur in the world, but we're also seeing a ridiculous demand for talent and the highest level of vacancy in all of human history. The idea, certainly in my sector, that automation is replacing jobs is an absolute fallacy. What it's doing in my sector is reducing vacancy, which means we can count the benefit of reducing the overall P&L for any one individual department and appease the CFO by saying, look, here you go, CFO, I've reduced my P&L by $500,000, $1 million US, but I've not actually affected any job because I'm still running $3 million US of vacancy. I'm just fixing a problem, right? A lot in our sector and asset and fund administration have outsold themselves. So we're spending huge quantities of money on overtime, really affecting attrition or having poor levels of attrition, and automation is genuinely making people's lives a lot better. I think that job loss is somewhat of a red herring at the moment. In short, I agree with everything you just said, Jim.
Yeah, and I think obviously we see it firsthand in terms of jobs and this sort of stuff. I mean, I feel like that is one thing I'm qualified to answer on. And yeah, there's peaks and troughs like any year, like any cycle of anything, especially with stuff that happened, especially in the States with the banks and this sort of stuff in terms of tech hiring. But it's just a pause. It's never an actual stop. It's just a pause and reassess before we move forward. And that's really what we've seen, and we're seeing them moving forward again. And you mentioned new jobs, and you mentioned how there's faith there's going to be new jobs. I mean, if we were talking a year ago, no one would have mentioned the word prompt engineer or had any real idea what that means. And that's in months. That's really months. And now all of us are like, oh yeah, well, obviously this is what that is. I mean, sure, I don't think prompt engineers are going to be around all the time. I think it's going to be a big flash in a pan, maybe for a couple of years, and then it's going to sort itself out, and it's going to be a skill everyone has, and this sort of thing. But still, it's a new job that didn't exist a year ago that we all know about. And how often that happens, you don't really realize, but it happens all the time. And in terms of planning for success within projects, what if you had to pick one thing? If you had to pick one thing that's the most common problem that you see, what is it and why? Alex, you can go first. You haven't spoken for a while. Hi, Alex.
Yeah, sorry. I forgot I was on mute. Yeah, that's a really good one. I mean, there are quite a few. Just trying to think, what's the highest one I can think of? I would say the change management aspect. Building blocks isn't massively difficult. When you've got an experienced team, you can have your automation toolkit, which is like a multi-vendor approach where you've got loads of different technologies for all the different sections, like process mining, RPA, and all the other good stuff like Gen AI or chatbots. You can have your toolkit, you can have a team that's really experienced with that. But if they can't communicate the value of this and inform the rest of the business, you're pretty much just working in silo, and you're not going to be able to scale the use of these technologies across the business. So where I see the biggest issues are mainly just to do with that change management aspect and creating that automation or digital first culture. I still think a lot of managers today have to kind of upskill in that aspect, or at least try to understand that that's going to be a big thing going forward. They're not just going to be managing people, they're going to be managing automations as part of their departments or as part of their work. So how do you do that? It's all to do with upskilling, whether that be training in-house or training by a third party. And then it comes back down to also having the right systems in place to encourage your employees, empower them to be able to use these tools. I think someone mentioned it, citizen development. A lot of that's kind of like has a stigma in the industry. Some people are for it, some people are against it. I feel like the ones who are against it are the ones who haven't really seen it in its full force. I've been in not just small companies, but large institutions where they championed it. And they had like over, a good few hundred citizen developers that were building small automations. But when you scale that up, that's a significant saving or a significant change. And then that just it's almost like that compounding effect. It just gets better and better each time. It expands to more and more different departments. And that's all down to just communication, having the team having the business understand what's available, having like a center of excellence, you would say, like a central team that helps champion this across the business. And that's the only thing I would say. Once you've got your first few automations done, or your first few, I guess, AI models, or whichever you want to say, once you're on that journey, and once you start to go past those first few POCs, and you believe you've seen the business impact, you've seen the benefits, like qualitatively and quantitatively, then it's time to start thinking about how you're going to structure that going forward. What framework are you going to put in place? What team are you going to get together? And it doesn't have to be solely in IT. It could be a center of excellence built up of many different roles from different departments, right? A business analyst here, a developer there, blah, blah, blah. But the key thing is just understanding how you're going to govern that going forward.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. And 1 second, I just need to close the window. I mean, our office is in Silverstone, and it's the MotoGP this weekend. And for some reason, they've decided to start testing all the speakers out and pumping music out. But Jim, what would you say? What would you say is the number one reason for RPA project failures? And is it due to the planning?
I think it's 100% due to the unwillingness for the client to understand they need to stop and learn a little bit first, and for the consultant / integrator to be insistent that they stop and understand. Right. So a good thing at a conference, you're going by a vendor and they say your bot will run 24 hours a day. Well, that's ridiculous, right? There's 1,440 minutes in a day. That's how much it can run. How long does your process need to run? 3 minutes. Okay, well, you can do some math and know the most it could run. But did you ask your CIO how much unplanned downtime did we have last year? Because that needs to be added and subtracted from your total. And is everybody going to work 24 hours? No. And there's a whole conversation around, let's be realistic about what this automation is going to be able to do for you. How many it can run, how often it can run. Is it going to run only one thing, or is it going to run another? The conversation around, what's the staffing going to be? Well, we need 3 people to build automations. Great, but when you've got 4 or 5 automations running and there's a change to the infrastructure, someone's got to stop and fix that bot, right? The good thing about automation and RPA and all of these others is that they do the same thing over and over and over. The bad thing is, if you make any changes, you've got to make sure that it knows how to react to that change. And if Microsoft comes out with a new patch, you've got to put that on and test it to make sure that, it shouldn't do anything. Should's like the most overused word in IT. Right? Well, that shouldn't happen. Well, of course it shouldn't happen. That's why it's called broke. And so getting them to sit with you and understand, it takes time to get you started. They've gone to too many vendor places. They've listened to too many people go, oh, this is fast and it's easy and it's quick. Yeah, but you're doing the most complicated thing that we've ever done first. We don't know your network. We don't know your staff. We don't know your politics. You don't know us. You've never done one of these. You just heard somebody say it was quick and easy. What I can say is it's certainly all quicker and easier than it used to be. You know, somebody says, oh, this will take you almost 2 months. Oh my goodness, if that's all it's going to take, let's do it. Because we're used to these projects that took a year to not deliver. You know, we're used to a project at the 6-month mark, you come in and sit down with the requirements team who wasn't the requirements team that you started with, and them tell you those aren't the requirements. Well, we're going to make a change and it's going to take longer on the schedule. No, don't make it take longer. So now when somebody says, well, we could build you that in 2 weeks, we could build you that in a month, and somebody goes, that's not fast enough. So really helping the client to understand the real world of automation, right? And that when you build an RPA, that's different from using a machine learning model. When you're using chatbot, that's different than using RPA. Because all this digital labor that's out there reacts differently. And I think if you can come up with a plan to do that and quit trying to oversell, that you'll fix that once you get your contract. Because once you get your contract and it all goes to crap in a handbag, then you've got a client that says, we don't really need you anymore. There's a bunch of you out there. We want to find the one that can deliver us that miracle. And there's nobody there, but you're tarnished with a reputation then because you didn't stop and really help them understand this tech. They don't know it. They've just seen it.
Yeah, I think it's similar. It's similar in the business world as it is, say, the dating world. If you're seeing someone and all of their girlfriends, all of their boyfriends are the ones making the mistake, and it's always their fault. Sometimes it's probably theirs. And I think it's the same if you're using consultancies, isn't it? You're not, if every consultancy is doing something wrong, it's probably not the consultancy. What are your thoughts, Will? What do you see are the main problems?
Absolutely. So I think at 3 different stages, again, I think it's a great answer from both of the guys there. In my view, there are 3 critical issues that happen in 3 different stages. Stage 1, when you're first adopting this, especially if you're using externals or you might be using your own internal staff, but an external tool is absolutely what Jim just said about you almost always going to get overpromised and underdelivered. I think there's a real challenge in our industry at the moment of trying to make this out to be much easier than it is. Assume you can get through that. You're working with someone fairly honest, so you've got a collaborative relationship. Once you get to scale, the biggest problem that I've ever observed and consistently observed is benefit realization. And in agreeing what the KPIs and your benefit realization are going to be. Do you care about hours back to the business, or do you care about how those hours flow down into EBITDA and how they affect the P&L? Do you care about customer satisfaction? Do you care about employee retention? And how you're going to design a method or mechanism that's going to accurately identify what benefits your program is bringing to an organization. If you're in a large organization, you can be damn sure there's a lot of other projects that are going to be affecting similar KPIs, and actually unpicking how to do that benefit identification is quite complicated, but well worth the effort up front. Once we then get to scale, to me, it really becomes about methodology. I think the methodology you start with really needs to align to corporate culture. Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast and all that good stuff. If you try and go do something that's too dissimilar, if I went to Department of Defense, well, Royal Navy or something, and said, right, we're doing this super agile, I'm not going to tell you exactly what I'm going to achieve. I'm just telling you I need some money and I need 2 months and a bunch of developers in this room. It's not going to work, right? So you can't start with methodology. Once you get to scale and we're looking at what methodology is going to make this delivery as best as possible, should it be something quite agile? Should it be waterfall? Should it be some form of hybrid? I think people get really stuck in, not at that point, you can start really affecting corporate culture. And I think people pick methodologies that lend themselves to delays because they expect us to be able to predict the future. And in reality, again, to Jim's point, a lot of underlying systems will change. And I certainly don't have a crystal ball. I'm pretty sure most other consultants in this space and practitioners in this space don't either, yet will quite often sell it as saying, I will deliver you exactly 17,286 euros and 19 pence in precisely 1,847.6 development hours. Do we know that? No, we don't, right? And I think we need to get coach organizations much more towards agile methods of working. That's not simple, but all of the big programs I've seen win operate in a more agile, more nimble, let's say, to get away from the word agile, manners of operation.
No, I get that, and as you say, sometimes with that fail fast, fail quick, which is easier said than done, especially in public sector and this sort of things.
Well, though, right?
Yeah, no, precisely. And I think from my side, I think a lot of the problems we see people talk about are it's the humans, isn't it? It's the humans. It's crap goes in, crap goes out. Like if you're not setting it up properly, if you're not set up in that sort of way. And Jim, I wanted to bring this up with you because I know we spoke about it. Your favorite term, broken bot syndrome. What?
Oh yeah, I heard broken bot syndrome about a year ago, and it just drove me crazy. Right? The bots aren't breaking. The bots are doing exactly what we tell them to do over and over and over again. That's why we like them. Right? The broken part is us. We do it too fast. So CIO doesn't tell the developers that there's a new change coming early enough that they can make that change, test that change, tell the business unit that the change is coming. And one day the bot stops working and they call and say, well, the bot's not working. Well, the bot's still doing what it used to do. It's just that doesn't work on our new infrastructure. And so we have the responsibility to keep the automations up to date. The bots don't. The automations, the chat bot doesn't know what time a business opens. We have to tell it somewhere. So if it's putting out the wrong time for your company's store hours, it's not that bot's fault. It does exactly what we tell it to do. And so I'm just really, it was so funny when I heard that, because I was like, why are we blaming the one thing that has nothing to do with it? We coded it wrong. We didn't test it correctly. We didn't have it. The requirements were from the wrong person, but it's not the bot. They will run over and over the same way that I want the Ferris wheel at the park to run over and over. We have to go inspect the Ferris wheel to make sure that there's no cracks in any of the welds. The Ferris wheel doesn't do that. It just keeps going round and round, and we ride it and we enjoy it.
Yeah, and I think with humans, when they're setting bots up and programming them, if they're doing it the way that they've exactly done it every time, that's not the most efficient way. That's not the way that a bot should do it, and people sometimes, and they don't necessarily understand that, and that's what can cause issues and dependencies, I guess. But yeah, so in terms of other areas, I know there's a couple of questions that have popped through. Sorry for not picking up on these. Alex mentioned in terms of citizen-led automation. Jim, is it something that you've seen used at all in the businesses that you worked at? Is it something that you've been successful?
Yeah, so I'll give you a real quick answer. All of us have iPhones now, and we all love citizen developers at the iTunes store and the Google store, right? Neither Google or Apple are building thousands and thousands of apps. Citizen developers are. So if you look at that model, Apple's just not letting anybody build it and put it on their platform in their ecosystem. There's a test. There are standards. So citizen development doesn't mean wild, wild west, everybody with a stick shooter riding a horse shooting somebody. It means that anybody who's got a good idea has an opportunity to present that idea in a structured way that makes sure that the ecosystem survives. And then when it runs, we can choose to use it or not. Right? And if it doesn't last on there because nobody's buying it or nobody's using it for free, we all know that wasn't the best idea, but it didn't cost us anything to do that. But we had champions out there in the form of developers. So the idea of not using your people, the most valuable resource that every company says they have, and then they don't want to let them do anything with response or with regards to automation. Citizen development is how we're going to go into the future, and it's going to be a safe, secure way to do it.
Will, what are your thoughts?
Not quite on the same thread. So I think reserving this what I would start with is I think having a bunker of deep developers is probably not the right way to go. right? With RPA, I can see the opportunity for more sort of citizen or super user developers. My fear would be accountant. And think about Excel, right? Everybody has Excel, but not everybody uses VBA. Not everybody knows how to do it. Not everybody can create macros that then execute at a corporate level. A junior accountant couldn't create a macro that automatically submits a 1099 tax return form to the IRS without it going through certain levels of checks and balances. So the thing I absolutely agree with Jim is it's not the Wild West. It's not. I love that vision as well. People with 6 shoots on horses going around everywhere. It's much more controlled than that. And I think a lot of tools are coming into play now that allows us to control it better, which is why I say not exactly the same rather than disagreeing with where Jim's going. Now, where I think this gets really interesting is when we go away from needing to have an iota of development capability, because we've all said, yeah, okay, RPA, it's easy to build, it's a configurator, but then you still have to go and do 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 weeks in the relevant tools academies in order to get certifications at junior, basic, advanced, whatever. If you go to Pi.ai right now, you can go and have a conversation with a bot, with a GPT model, or a generative AI model that will coach you on how to use it. It will start, like the hardest thing about going to ChatGPT or Perplexity or Bard or anything like that is, Christ, what am I going to ask it, right? It's cool. It's like being back in the late 90s and surfing the internet. None of us knew what we were doing. We're like, what's this internet thing? Let's go find out what it can do. But like Pi.ai kind of helps because it asks you the first question. Anybody can learn how to interact with it very easily. If the data bit, and I don't want to drop us into that well at the moment, but if the data bit can be resolved, generative AI, more advanced AI toolings that are designed, that are changing the manner of interface between humans and machines, those things, absolutely. Everybody in the world is going to be using that. But where we start increasing the requirement of being able to speak a development language, having coding standards, whilst there are tools coming out that help us do that at the moment, I don't think we're quite at the nirvana. I'll pick one of the 3. Let's give UiPath licenses to every single person in my company. Let's give Power Automate licenses to every single person in my company. But I think we are way beyond, let's just keep the UiPath licenses to my COE. So I think we're heading towards where Jim says we're going, but we're still on the journey there, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I guess on that side, it's the more intelligent it becomes, the easier it is when it's not everyone has a UiPath bot, but everyone's got a little chatbot here that you can type into and you can just ask and tell it, and then it's different, isn't it?
It's so industry specific as well, right? There are certain things that transcend industries, but if you're in any industry where any of your output requires at the moment, until legislation changes, a authorizing officer, then I think you're less likely to allow people to run around and automate random bits, because the authorizing officer could face prison, could face fines, could face some other stuff. Now that's fear of change, and that can be overcome. And I really do think there are some tools out there that are starting to help with that. Whereas if I set up a consultancy today, or when the 4 of us on this call decide, screw it, we're going to go start our own advisory consultancy in some space, from day one, I would expect everybody to be building their own automations, because it's at the very core of the culture of our business. And I accept that I don't know everything. I haven't designed it perfectly. Help me iterate my business and improve. But if I suddenly became the CEO of AXA Life, I'm not about to go and buy 200,000 UiPath licenses and say, right, everybody automate everything, because I think it would be chaos. And I think there's a balance to be had in between.
No, and I get that, and I know we're running short on time now, but I think as you say, there's a balance for everything, and what everyone needs to do is realize that if you're trying to make everything perfect before you start, you're never going to start. And if you're not going to think about anything and you're going to start straight away, you're probably going to fail. And I think that's really where the balance is, of knowing that not everything's going to go right from the get-go, but if you plan properly and you plan well, and you have a start date, and you're like, we're going to plan as much as we can up here, and then we're going to get going. And then what happens. That's probably the happy medium that you're going to find. And if you need to learn any more about any of our panelists, I know that we'll have all of the details for everyone on email. We'll have the recording of this go out after. I just want to take a minute to thank Jim, Alex, Will. Thanks so much for your time. Lovely speaking to you all. Look forward to chatting to you soon. And yeah, have a great morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. Cheers. Bye.